Mount Zion and rules all creation.
Checking with our comms folks that are we live? Then let us begin, those in attendance in person and those listening online, with a word of prayer. If I could ask Ms. Joyce Ann to have a word of prayer. Stand, please.
Let us really give the one all the honor to praise while we here today. He wake us up, and it's only because of him that we're here. And thank you all for coming. And I don't take prayer lightly. I pray because I truly believe there's a God. And I'm here today because my country is my country. And at the end of the day, if I didn't believe in these four that sit behind me, I would not be praying. So let us pray and let God have his way. O eternal Heavenly Father, as we come before you this evening, we give you thanks, Lord, that you wake each and every one of us up this day. Lord, you know that this day would come, that we would be here in your presence amongst one another, dear God. And Lord, everyone that is here, bless us mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and Lord, financially, dear God. And Lord, we thank you for these four brave souls. And Lord, you know each one of their hearts, you know the desires. And Lord, you know what they need more than any of us, dear God. And whatever they need, my God, I pray tonight that you replace it, dear God. And if there's fear, I ask you to comfort their hearts, Lord, as they take this stand, as David did in the day when he was alone, Lord, and man did not understand. Bless every soul here and give them the understanding, the wisdom, Lord, to intake everything that will be said. Take control now, dear God. Bless and keep each one of us. And as we leave here, my God, I pray that you will cover each one and take each one back to their board. Remember the government on a whole, my God. Everyone, you say we ought to pray for those that are in charge, Lord. And we pray tonight, my God, that you and your will be done in our little islands, dear God. So bless, oh Father God, Mr. Ebanks, Lord, Miss Catherine, Miss Heather, Sabrina, Father God, each one of the ministers, dear God, tonight, in a very special way. Give them the direction they need, the wisdom, dear God. Let them seek you always, dear God, that our islands will be led by those that understand by wisdom is how a man will prosper. Bless us now. Keep us, O God, and guide us, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray and ask these things, and we say, Amen.
Thank you, Ms. Joyce Ann. For those of you who are in attendance, there was a brief run of show passed out to you by hand. For those listening at home, that order will be announced by Ms. Ebanks Wilkes, but we will first commence these proceedings with a welcome address from Ms. Heather. Then we will turn to Ms. Ebanks Wilkes, who will then set out the agenda, some housekeeping items, and the sequence of events. Over to you, Ms. Heather.
Thank you, MP Andre. Everyone in your seats? You all have your bottles of water? You'll be served snacks later. Everyone comfy? We're ready to take you all for a little ride. It may get a little bumpy. And I promise you, we're gonna steer clear of any tsunami. But at the end of the night, I promise you a smooth landing. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of everybody here, as well as MP Bernie Bush. Just want to begin by saying it's a real pleasure and a blessing to see so many of you here tonight. And I thank each of you in person or online. It means so much to be here, gathered together here in the Seafarers Hall, in a place filled with so many memories and of so much importance for us all. In fact, the mission statement of the Seafarers Association aligns quite fittingly with why we are here. It says, it exits to assist Caymanian seafarers and their families in need by improving their quality of life, enabling them to live with a sense of dignity and also advocating for their rights. Tonight, I wish to open my heart to you and explain the decision I made along with my colleagues. On October the 31st, it was with heavy hearts we made the difficult choice to hand in our resignation to Her Excellency, the Governor. It was not a decision made lightly, nor one that came without pain. My heart broke as I weighed what it would mean to step away from a position I was honored to hold, a position that gave me the opportunity to serve my country at a high level as a parliamentary secretary for tourism and social development. At this time, I wish to thank MP Andre Ebanks and Minister Bryan for putting their trust in me in these two roles. But sometimes, my friends, we're faced with the choice to follow the path given to us or to stand up for what is right and just. I don't think there's anyone who can question my representation over the years, but I had to question myself in recent months. In the beginning, it was my joy and delight to represent what I was assigned to in my role as an elected member, and I worked hard every day. I want to just make it a reminder to my people that I took care of everyone that I possibly could, and do all I could to make their lives comfortable. I did everything I could, but there were days when my soul didn't feel settled. Despite my attachment to every one of my colleagues whom I took to as a family or sorts, I began to observe conduct that was not in keeping with my values. Behavior that I felt was sometimes inappropriate, I began to see things that were questionable. I expressed my feelings and concerns at every opportunity I had, but I began to feel like my concerns were not being understood or addressed. I began to feel what many of you have spent so much time telling me you are feeling: hopelessness. There are days I feel like we're losing our country and our heritage, and I can't help but to sympathize with our youth who feel like they're losing their birthright. I made the choice to resign because I felt there was no other way to uphold the promise I made to you. And just a reminder, I am still the elected member for Savannah. I still sit in the office that we hold in the community of Savannah. It is shared between the Savannah Newlands community. I was elected to be your voice, to represent the District of Savannah, and in the post of Parliamentary Secretary, to represent the people of these 3 Cayman Islands with honesty and integrity. And I aim to do so in a way that brings people together. Those of you who know me know that I've always been a person who follows the rules, goes with the flow, who will put things behind me quickly. You have to be in this line of work. And I've always been someone who strives to see the good in others and who, above all, values dignity and peace. In fact, my faith guides me on this. Matthew chapter 5, verse 9 reads, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." I'll be the first to admit that I don't always get it right, but I try. Just like so many of you here tonight, I aim to be a person who brings people together, a woman who chooses peace wherever possible. But in this instance, I had to take a stand. The treatment that we endured, the lack of respect, the feeling of being unheard, undervalued, this is not the Cayman we were raised to love or strive for. It is certainly not the Cayman I intend to pass on to our children and grandchildren. In recent months, I began to see things that shook my trust. I realized that I was being forced to choose between doing what I was elected to do and staying silent in the face of unacceptable behavior. This wasn't easy. My beloved parents built a foundation for me of strong values and morals. Equally so, my beloved teacher, the late Sister Wilma Moffett, who instilled those values and principles just as deep. My heart, soul, and conscience is my guide, and I heard their voices, and I heeded their teachings, and listen, I did. I listened to their now still quiet voices that continue guiding me, and some days those voices echo loudly. It upsets me to see that there are those who grew up learning these same values and guiding principles from the same people and now appear to have forgotten them. They need to remember that I'm here to serve all, that I will not be swayed, and I will stand by my values. Thank you. I know I bring a softer approach, and I'm often seen as someone who is approachable, keeps the peace, and who believes in dialogue and respect. But I also know that you elected me to stand for what's right and to stand with dignity. And so I made my choice. My people deserve better. Enough is enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Heather, for those profound welcome remarks, which sets the tone for tonight's meeting. Before we dive into the agenda, there are a few housekeeping matters that I'd like to discuss, as MP Andre has mentioned. The first, as many of us have been asked about, is this meeting location. And I want to express to all of you that we are aware that we're all independent MPs who happen to, in this instance, take a shared position on principle and integrity. And simply put, the current function of the government couldn't continue. Our resignations were not premeditated. And after our resignations, we did intend to have our constituency meetings to reach our constituents. However, we found difficulties at district levels, securing venues on the basis, and I quote, "The use of government property, including buildings, should only be used for the proper conduct of government business, and the use of government establishments for the purposes of political activities by any candidate should not be permitted." But we all know that we are not political candidates. We are elected officials who were just trying to simply have a public meeting to update you, our people, on the current status. As such, we were unable to use the largest indoor venue in our constituency, or in our district, I should say. And since that was not approved, all four of us then began planning our meetings on the basis that no government facility would then be available. Hence, we are here. In addition to that, weather. Many of you may have seen that the weather forecast had anticipated rain showers. As Murphy's Law, it's not raining tonight. However, again, we wanted to ensure we had an indoor venue. Also, we wanted to factor in that there are persons who cannot attend in person. So we wanted to ensure that if we started an outdoor venue, it didn't begin raining, because our media individuals who are here, media reps, would no longer be able to facilitate streaming the broadcast. So we don't want to get caught up in the location of the meeting, as we are all one people, one Cayman, and the conversations around our departure from our ministerial duties would have been the same regardless of whether we shared this message in West Bay or here in Prospect. So what we want to focus on is that we have done our endeavor best to ensure that this meeting and the message is accessible to everyone in the Cayman Islands. Also want to address the timing of the meeting. As many of you might want to track backwards, we just had a hurricane threat, followed by a long holiday weekend, Remembrance Day. And we also have in our presence the former Minister for Financial Services, and the benefit of having him with us is he pointed out that our main pillar, which is financial services, needed to be protected in a sense where we needed to ensure that the government had an opportunity to either collaborate with members of the opposition or function as they are doing so by reconfiguring their ministerial duties and operating on a minority government. Well, that has been done. An election date has now been set. So to the international markets, the government is functioning, and this meeting can be seen as local politics. With that being said, we have an agenda which we will follow through that will be unprompted, and as we take you through what transpired, we hope that you can understand and appreciate why we are sitting here tonight, sharing why we did step away from our ministerial duties. With that being said, I'm mindful that there are members that are listening who don't have sight of the agenda. So I will just say that we are going to discuss the proposed amendments to the National Conservation Act, then the proposed referendum, followed by the Ponciana Rehabilitation Center, then beach erosion, Cayman-Brac High School, conduct in caucus, anti-sexual harassment bill, and the regen termination. We are going to try to keep this as concise as we appreciate the time, and we want to give you all an opportunity to ask questions once we have finished. With that being said, I think it's probably the right time for us to dive into the first agenda item, which is the National Conservation Amendment Bill. So, as I was the former minister responsible for the National Conservation Act fell under my remit, I will start this conversation in this area. So many of you might remember the government reshuffled back in late November of last year, and in early January, all members of caucus got on a plane and we went to Cayman Brac, where we had a retreat. At that retreat, we discussed many matters that one could say we wouldn't want to have those discussions in government building. Why? The fear of leaks. But in my opinion, some of the leaks happen around the table. Anyway, the purpose of the meeting in Cayman Brac was to discuss topical issues, and one of these discussions was the National Conservation Bill. It was unanimously discussed amongst members that the composition of the National Conservation Council needed to be revisited, because the way that the council currently is comprised is majority of the voting members are public servants. So it does not comply with the Public Authorities Act. And then you get into the questions, is this a statutory authority, et cetera, et cetera. The long and short of it is, all members were of the view that the composition of the council could benefit from being reconfigured. So there wasn't an argument with that. There was a local attorney present, and he gave clear guidelines on what he considered to be a phased approach on how we could address the National Conservation Act. First, starting with just remedying this imbalance. It didn't require going to Parliament to make these changes. These changes could be done right around the table at Cabinet by way of a Cabinet order. So we left that meeting, and one thing was certain, all members were on the same page in terms of reconfiguring the National Conservation Council. A few weeks later, a meeting was held at the Ministry of Planning, and I was invited to the meeting, and the title of the meeting was National Conservation Act. I attended. In attendance was the Honorable Premier and her Chief Officer, the Minister of Planning and his Chief Officer, the Honorable Attorney General, as well as a King's Counsel that the government has relied on previous occasions and has previously been retained by the Ministry of Planning. In that meeting, discussions arose about, again, concerns with the National Conservation Amendment Act. Now, I'm a new minister. I can't speak to the operation of the law. That is what the technical team would do. I didn't have my technical team present. However, there's only 3 members of the Cabinet or caucus present, so one would only assume this is just a preliminary conversation. It will go back to caucus, and we will discuss this matter amongst members. Once we had determined that we were all on consensus with whatever position was to be taken, then my responsibility as the minister would be to go back to my team and instruct them on preparing a cabinet paper that reflects the wishes of the caucus. However, no caucus meeting took place, and what then transpired was the creation of a cabinet paper and the draft amendment bill, which was then provided to me with the intention for me to have my team bring this forward, because I am the person responsible for this area. So it's my responsibility to bring the amendment. Of course, when I sat with my team and we went through these proposed amendments, we very quickly determined that the proposed amendments would not be in the spirit of conservation or protecting the environment. Quite the opposite. It would be to promote unfettered development. So therefore, my responsibility is to go back to the caucus with a paper to approve these drafting instructions for this said amendment bill. Instead, I prepared a cabinet note setting out all of the reasons which had, whether it was the Constitution to support it, that we were in breach of Section 18 of the Constitution. As minister responsible for the environment, it is a constitutional requirement to ensure that we are protecting the environment, and that has to be balanced with veto power for the government. And so as a result of that, I took the cabinet note back to caucus, and to make a long story short, discussions ensued for a number of weeks. And after the members understood that I would not be bringing the amendment bill, the Premier then exercised her right as Premier to authorize another minister to bring the amendment bill. And so the member wrote to me in accordance with the cabinet manual and advised me that it was he had been granted permission by the Premier to bring forward these amendments since I was refusing to bring them. Now, the way that the cabinet, I feel this mic is too close. I think I'm going to eat the mic. The way that the cabinet manual is written is that if a minister refuses to bring a bill or a paper, the minister's ministry and their staff are not required to contribute to this said paper. So the Minister for Border Control and Labor took it and prepared the draft amendment paper along with his staff, who don't have any technical knowledge in protecting the environment. And there is where we started the discussions about the amendment bill. Now, of course, this was something that we didn't come out to discuss because we're trying to continue functioning together, and a compromise would be if a minister is bringing the paper and not me, we'd have to see how it goes when you get down to the time for it to get to Parliament. Now, one of the things that has been uttered on the radio, and I've heard it, I think, twice since we've resigned, is that MP Andre and myself have contributed to the draft bill. That's correct. I am the minister, I was the minister responsible for the area, so I have the technical team explaining to me why certain things in the legislation simply couldn't function. And then you have the former Deputy Premier looking at it from a legal perspective, as he is an attorney, setting out areas where it wasn't constitutional or areas where it wouldn't, we asked questions about how is this going to function in practice. And every time we raised the concerns, obviously the bill would have gone back to legal and they would have been, looking at enhancing it and accepting that a lot of the concerns we raised were valid. Now, just because we contributed to the draft bill didn't mean that we were going to support it, but it was our obligation, one, to raise this awareness so that members around the table who had to make this decision could understand that, hey, this isn't just about good governance. This is what this is going to do to things like EIAs and conservation plans, and the list goes on. Now, I will say that the most recent version looks a lot better than what we started off as. But to say that because we contributed to the bill means that we were supporting it is untrue. We never ever gave any indication that we were going to support the bill. However, this is where the conversation started about the National Conservation Amendment Bill, and our last discussion with that was at the last caucus that we attended. Again, not going to start the story at the end, but it's quite surprising to me that what's being put out in the public domain is that we left because we couldn't have our way with this bill. And there's much more to tell because this discussion about the National Conservation Amendment Bill was just the beginning of what took place. I don't know if you want to, either of you want to chime in about the discussions about the National Conservation Amendment Bill.
If I may, Ms. Kathy, 'cause I think to reiterate the point for the public, we leave a caucus meeting in January 2024 with the understanding from that caucus meeting that we were not going to take a bill to the House to amend the act. We would seek, by way of cabinet order, to address the perceived imbalance of the council. For the rest of us ministers who are not in this separate meeting that the minister just described in March, myself and other ministers, including former Minister Turner, are in the dark from January to May. When 1 May comes, we are delivered a bundle this thick with attorney opinions by an attorney who's known to the government, but in this case, procured and engaged by the planning ministry to suggest amendments to the Environmental Act before cabinet has issued instructions to amend said act. When I raised this point in caucus, the defense of the premier was that it is not unusual to give the legal drafting department a head start when something is time sensitive. True, but the point that I raised, because that often happens in financial services where things are time sensitive and you want to give the legal draft additional time. But in those instances, the ministry given the instruction is the ministry with responsibility of the subject matter that is able to guide legal drafting. In this case, you have a ministry that's diametrically opposed to the environment, leading the drafting before drafting instructions have been issued. So before you get to whether or not the modifications are right or not, you have two main process issues. You leave a caucus meeting in January with that no changes would have to happen to the act at all other than the composition. And without any further indication in 1 May, you get a bundle this thick that completely has wholesale changes to the act. No one in cabinet approved that. That's the first fundamental difficulty. Secondly, cast your minds into what we're saying. Listen to this carefully. This is the equivalent that if the health minister had a difficulty in the Companies Act, deciding that in their own volition, they are going to have a separate meeting with legal drafting to come up with amendments to the Companies Act and then give it to me as the financial services minister, whose team hasn't even looked at it yet and say, pass this on our behalf. That is outrageous.
Yep.
So at that point, the guardrails are off. And we certainly, most of us came to the conclusion, myself included, that my position wasn't budging from where we were in January. But if the majority of you are going to proceed down this road, yes, I'm going to make contributions to try to make this as palatable as possible for my people. Yeah. But my position never changed. I'm still where we were in January.
Yeah. Which, Andre, leads to the point, as was stated in the public, that I supported it and then changed my mind on the 31st of October. As you have heard explained here tonight, how long we have been back and forth with this one particular issue. It's almost like sending a plumber to do the electrical work. And when I realized, after hearing my two colleagues back and forth questioning, it was a no-brainer when we kept seeing a document placed before us in caucus that just riddled with bullet holes and just didn't make any sense. So it was at that point, to break it down in simpler terms, to me, it was sending a plumber to do the electrical work, and it did not make sense. Hence me changing my decision, and I am proud that I did.
If that's not enough, The icing on the cake is that it's not the planning minister who's now decided to now bring this forward. It's not the premier whose subject belongs to, all the subject belong to the premier. It is the labor minister that's now going to be presenting this bill. And that's not to say that the labor ministry staff aren't smart and capable. They are. This isn't a question about that. It's the fact that they are not the subject matter. And every time I ask this in caucus, how are we going to explain to the public that the Minister for Labor is bringing the environmental changes? There is no answer to that question. The person who could bring it is the premier, but must know that this is going to be controversial, so don't want to touch it.
Yep. I think the highlight of what we raised is just the process and the fact that it was at this particular matter where the process then started to segue from what should be the normal and correct way in which we are deliberating on the business of the country.
Yeah.
And so with that, I think that we probably don't need to belabor the National Conservation Amendment anymore. We have a lot of matters to go through. Then go on to the, unless you want to.
No,
Hiya.
no. If there are any follow-up questions in Q&A, we'll be happy
Right.
to. But in the interest of time, let's move on to the next item, the proposed referendum. Now, I want to make this absolutely clear, particularly to us, former Minister Kathy and I, as representatives from the District of West Bay. Cruise tourism is a business the country is already in. So nobody is suggesting that there shouldn't be upgraded cruise facilities. That isn't the argument. The argument is what location that's most environmentally suitable and whether it can fall into the budget. So our difficulty with the proposed referendum when it first came to caucus is, first, this is going to be on a day separate from polling day. What's the cost to the country for that? I believe the estimate came back somewhere in the region of 1.2 million approximately. With a question to just ask something to the effect of, should there be upgraded facilities?
Do you support? Mhm.
Do you support that? But that question is half-baked. Because anybody watching the last administration, the struggle in the argument was where and how much. So that, in our opinion, is futile. To waste $1.2 million that could go to so many other things. Fine, for those of us, for those on social media who want to know whether there was still advocacy and whether we gave up, it's those of us who then advocated that at least bring it on polling day where there already is, so you don't have to waste that money, and at least add some additional questions that may be of national importance. But our primary concern with this is that what happens with a half-baked question and the country says no? To this day, there is no answer to that question. Because what does the next tourism minister do if the country says no, or only a small fraction of folks are actually interested in the referendum? Everybody else goes Miami shopping for the day. The answer comes back either inconclusive or no. How, if the objective is to save and upgrade our cruise tourism, what do we say to the operators then? Is it not better and wiser policy to study first, where can it be put that's the most environmentally suitable? What form can it take that's within the budget, and just make that case to the country and do it? That doesn't mean that everybody is going to like it. There will be a core, yes, but once, in our view, the country gets over the hump, sees that it can be done, you may be able to do it elsewhere. But still, majority rules, we held our nose, we voted for it, and we proceeded on it because we're still trying to keep the team together, but it presents, now that we're away from collective responsibility, no good answer to the country and our tour boat operators.
And to add to that, you said it earlier, but the need for timing to educate and get the awareness out to the voters on, one, the importance of going out to the polls to vote for this, and two, the lack of having the information. When we sat and had conversations with the stakeholders that were in support of, and even I didn't sit personally in the meetings with the CPR group, but the concerns were all about the education. What is the education? What is the government's position on this? And to have a referendum, well, now in April, and not have that information out to the public, it's going to make it very challenging for voters to make an informed decision.
Yes, in regards to that, my stance have never, ever changed in the sense of when we realized that we were at the end of our term and this referendum was still a big topical issue. In the decision to remaining fair to the people and making sure that we came from an informed place and making sure that all of those who takes our environment to heart were actually represented truthfully. Exactly as my colleagues explained, you do not want to get a referendum with a result that is driven by the government, where you're not using the entire electoral voters list, but only those persons who come out and participate on that to make the decision. Is that a true representation on those critical national topics? So these are things, again, that pretty much aided in our decision to reaching exactly where we are. And we did not feel that it was right that you support a referendum at this time, one, for the cost that it was costing this country. What have we done to really address other national issues like the lowering the cost of living, dealing with our electrical prices and all this sort of stuff? And we will be bounding possibly the hands of another administration, but more so, what is a true reflection of the people? And it is for that reason that we, again, and I'm going to sound like a broken record tonight, proud that we stood up and moved when we did.
Ponciana?
That takes me into the next subject matter on the agenda for tonight, the Ponciana Rehabilitation Center. This has been aired. Ladies and gentlemen, we understand the importance of getting the Ponciana Rehabilitation Center finished. I have been assured by my cabinet and colleagues that this, from day one of our election, was a top priority. A project of this nature, being built now going for 12 years, there is no excuse why we have had a plethora of problems. I did my best. I took my licks on the floor of Parliament. I've taken my licks from the public, but for just full clarity as to how it all managed, how it's ran, for the sake of this audience, and to reiterate what was stated. The project was always a project that was project managed under Public Works Department. The Ministry of Health and Wellness provided and voted for the funding in order for the project to continue. This was a project that was inherited. No, I do not have a hands-off approach. You elected someone with dignity and grace, and someone who stays in their lane when it comes to their role as a minister. The project management team, as I stated, was is Public Works, and I depended on updates. You go back into the Hansards. I was giving, as the Minister of Health, 3 delivery dates that we would have turned over this facility to the people to bring our people back home. Subject to those dates required planning inspection to make sure that everything was in order with plumbing, electrical, fire suppression. And it appears that every time I was told a date, the date would come, and prior to inspection, they would realize that there were a plethora of problems. There was mold, roofs were leaking. Then you wonder who was project managing. That did not rest on the Minister of Health or the Ministry of Health. And this is by no means pointing the finger. I'm just being honest. because my competence as a minister has been challenged. That is not the case. I worked in the confines of my remit, and I did not overstep those boundaries. I have never shunned from sharing with the public what information has been given to me with the experts and the project management team. But what I find bizarre, after bringing it and being very candid the last time I was on the floor of Parliament as to exactly what the problems were, that all of a sudden, since our resignation, all of these issues have disappeared. And now we have a new date of December 15th for delivery. Now you kind of wonder why. And now you have two ministries that are really collaborating. I'll let you be the judge of that. But ladies and gentlemen, it does not smell right. It does not feel right to see that you're sitting around a table where you have to question whether or not it was by design or was it really issues. The Ponciana Rehabilitation Center needs to be stopped being used as a political football, and let's get our people home. I represent everyone, and the four of us has this country at heart, and we will support any minister that brings it home. And that if that is even December the 15th, and all it was a political stunt of a ribbon cutting not done by the Minister of Health, then so be it. That's besides the point. If it meets all the necessary inspections, that's good. Congratulations. Our people will be proud. But I am a mature person. I am honored to have served as your Minister of Health, Wellness, and Home Affairs. But I am happy that if our resignation would lead to all of these issues going up in thin air, congratulations. I should have done this a long time ago. That would lead into the very topical issue of beach erosion, which too was something that descended on us. And this is why it's not a blueprint as cabinet ministers and as an elected arm. But I will leave my colleague, Ms. Kathy, to go into the beach erosion again. As you can see, what has happened, obviously to me, with Ponciana being able to successfully deliver that project is taking on the same characteristics why it was decided to put a cabinet paper by another minister and totally disrespect the minister who is responsible for the project. So there are similar characteristics here, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll leave you to read in between the line as to what is obviously being played out.
Thank you, Ms. Sabrina. The segue into the beach erosion, we appreciate that it's a weeknight and it's getting late. We don't want to take too long on the topics. We want to get straight to the meat of the matter so that you can then in turn have your question time with us after. In relation to the beach erosion, as this fell under my remit, as the public would assume, when we had one of our most recent storms, the leader of the opposition reached out to me and requested a meeting because, as many of you know, his constituency has all of the 7 Mile Beach coast. And at that time, there was a lot of debris that had fallen into the ocean. And some of the debris had actually been there for quite some time from previous storms. And what was determined very quickly is that there was a gray area in simple things like someone's got a tree that's fallen from their property and it's protruding on their property and into the ocean. Do you go to planning? Do you go to the Department of Environment? Do you get a coastal works application? So I will publicly, acknowledge the leader of the opposition for reaching out as an MP for the area to ensure that the matter was addressed. And that was when many of you might have seen that I issued a press release saying that I was having a joint ministerial meeting with all of the different ministries, because the matter relating to the beach erosion didn't just lie with the Department of Environment. You had the Ministry of Lands, you had Ministry of Planning, you had the Ministry of Tourism, and what transpired at the meeting was that 18 months ago, and this is where some of you may have seen my social media rant, which then ended up on a news article. I was quite frustrated to have learned that the Department of Environment had worked very diligently with addressing a proactive measure to deal with the beach erosion. Consultant had been hired, all the studies and surveys had been done on how much sand was going to be needed. And at that time, many of you might remember that the conversation was around who's going to pay for this sand, right? It was something that a lot of politicians probably didn't want to touch. I was a speaker at the time, but I remember seeing all of the stuff circulating about the sand and this 20 million or 25 million. Long story short, because the Ministry of Sustainability was preparing this proposal or solution, they did not feel that it would have been good governance for them to be the project sponsor, because then that would mean they're doing the protective replenishment exercise, and then the application for the Coastal Works applications has to come into the same said ministry or department. So they had a working group or whatever it was called, a task force with all of these different ministries, and the project was left with the Ministry of Lands for 18 months. And so what has happened is now the proposed solution requires another consultant to come in, or the same said consultant to come in, look at it again, additional costs. Now it's urgent. And actually the mere fact that this isn't something that was deemed a national emergency just baffles my mind, because with it not being deemed a national emergency, it made it very difficult for the Department of Environment or the ministry to move things forward in an expeditious manner. And so the reason why the public never got an update from me after I published that we were having this cross-ministry approach, and even some of the ministers, they were quite upset that I had issued my social media rant because the government hadn't responded. Question that I posed to the members were, let's look at the minutes. Was anything decided on the way forward after my team came in and set out where we are at and what needs to be done, and they need a steer from the caucus and cabinet? Please tell me what was decided. The long and short of it is, I'm the minister for the area, but we need somebody to guide and ensure with any government that things are moving forward. Because if it's not an interest to you, because you feel that politically it might be deemed as, oh, you're buying sand, we need to have an honest conversation, because folks, you want to talk about the beach erosion, you want to talk about cruise ports. At the end of the day, if you don't have 7 Mile Beach, it impacts both. It impacts livelihoods. It then puts our people in a position where they are running to NAU. The people that we are happy to see getting up in the morning and going to the West End or going to the hotels or driving to the hotels in East End. The hotels in East End are impacted right now because there's no beach on the waterfront. So it's a difficult conversation that needs to be had. Who's going to pay for the sand? Is the government going to collaborate with private sector? Is private sector going to deal with it directly? But at the end of the day, it certainly, in my honest opinion, was not something that was viewed as a priority for the government. And here I am, having to be quiet. The people of the public are looking at me as the Minister for Environment saying, what are you doing about the beach? When really my hands are tied. So that's why we're where we're at with the beach. And again, to what Minister Turner said, maybe now that we have stepped away, a solution will magically appear and everybody will address it expeditiously. And I do hope that that is the case, because ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of Caribbean islands that have beautiful beaches, and people are visiting these countries with or without a cruise port.
Another thing I may add on to that, Catherine, is that what could not be clear is if some of these hoteliers, the owners, went ahead because government just couldn't appear to get their act together and put sandback on to protect their property. You think we got problem walking now? Make that happen. Who will own the beach? So this has to be a delicate balance, and we could not come. And I mean, we got to stop playing this where you're only giving half of the truth and not looking at the reality. But when you're actually saying something that is sound and it makes sense and just change trajectory a little bit, what we saw being displayed, in all honesty, was almost shut up. You don't know what you're saying. Who could continue in that condition?
Now, to move the agenda item on, where there was urgency and strong leadership is when it came to the new proposed Cayman Brac High School. Now, I want to deal with this as sensitively as possible because the Brackers are our Caymanians too. We have, as caucus, had a site visit to see that an upgraded educational facility is certainly in order and is overdue. So there was never any doubt about that. There are two major points to highlight here: the process and the money. So I'm going to try to, as much as possible, paint what it is like for caucus members, particularly caucus members who are ministers, particularly ministers who are running two ministries. So you're keeping up with your day-to-day work as hard as you can. Caucus papers are usually distributed on Friday or over the weekend so that you can prepare yourself for discussions on the Monday. That at least gives you either Saturday or Sunday night or Monday morning to peruse the paper so that you can have an informed contribution to each matter. When the final business case came for the Cayman Brac High School, so mind you, there would have been an iteration before, to be fair, but that would have been many months ago. This is where it's now come down for the final scrutiny. It comes not on the caucus agenda. So it's not circulated over the weekend for you to read. It comes late on a Monday, not on the agenda, and lands at 6-something-ish after you've already been debating and going back and forth for 8 to 9 hours. This is a 70-page plus document that you're being asked now to listen is being led by the civil servants to try to be able to keep up with this conversation in caucus. Very difficult, this caucus on a good day, to have a clear, objective discussion. Far less in a matter of this importance and of this expense. So yes, there were those of us that were trying to thumb through it as best as we could to keep up with it, but weren't really able to formulate intelligent questions because you're still trying to get the grips with the document, and it's clear the majority are happy for it to go through. Still, there's a fail-safe built in, because normally what happens is after caucus on a week prior, it then usually falls one more week, and there's an agenda item of each caucus meeting that's called pre-cabinet. So those are all the matters that were supported by caucus the prior week. That is your last chance to say, look, hold on here. I either agree or disagree, or that's it, hold your peace, because it's going to cabinet the next day. And once you get into cabinet, the elected arm should be coming in, organized, ready to pass something as one group, unless the non-elected arm, the civil servants, bring up either a legal or technical difficulty to make you think about it. In this case, it was accelerated to cabinet the very next day. So those of us who were trying to thumb through it realized what was said at the end of caucus and realized we need to read this tonight because this is going to cabinet tomorrow. We then try to read it as possible and say that this is inhumane. These Two former ministers are fit to be tied at this point. I'm at least saying, no, let's at least go to the premier one more time and say, can we recaucus about this before it goes to cabinet? I did so that morning of the Tuesday for cabinet to say, this has a very heavy price tag. This is really going to fall on a lot of ministers who are now going to be collectively responsible for this decision. Can we recaucus? Because you could still have a separate caucus this week. If the questions are answered, there's a process called a round robin that it can be approved outside of a meeting. So you shouldn't really be all that delayed. The reaction was absolutely no. This is something that's been going on for months. Say what you have to say in cabinet or we go to an early election. This is the pressure that we're under.
Yep.
There's no reason for that because we could just recaucus. Fast forward to minutes later, some moments later in cabinet, of course, the case is presented. It's asked whether or not there's a consensus and there are reservations. I won't bore you with that, but it got messy. So messy, the non-elected members decided to leave so that we could caucus. We were then able to ask questions as much as possible, but it was clear that in this special caucus meeting, the majority were going to go do this. We did as much as we could. Yeah. But there are two questions to ask if they say what's changed because this is in the budget. A lot has happened since then. We just talked about beach erosion. So even if the school is planned with some room for growth, can it not be pared down in price so that we can then throw down some sand on the beach? Can it not be pared down in price and still give our Caymanian pupils a better place to study? And if it's not that, we know there's been an existing issue for years that Little Cayman doesn't have a proper runway. And the civil aviation has been at pains every administration for this to be addressed. So let's not even make it a West Bay thing. Let's not even make it a Grand Cayman thing. You could have two infrastructure projects done for that money. The question is, can we stretch the money to better suit than have a vanity project? That is the concern. And that hasn't been answered. And yes, even if it comes late, this is where the final business case is. So cast your minds to whether it's a bill. Yes, it goes out to public consultation. Yes, a minister could be working on this for months. But when it comes for that cabinet approval, you're entitled to scrutinize it. And you should not be made to feel that you're going to lose the government. That's the choice that's in your mind and all of the responsibilities and drive the country to an early election or approve this. That is not the way the executive, in my view, should function.
And to add a little context to the actual subject matter on the Kimmenbrack School, anybody knows I have deep roots in Kimmenbrack. And like was earlier stated, it's not that anyone around the table were against a school or improving the facilities there in the Brack. We know what has been stated in the public's domain. And in quickly just leafing through the document that we were given the night before to read, what popped out at me was the fact that some of the things to try and scale down the price was the removal of hurricane-rated windows and doors. Pennywise, pound foolish, right? And me not being an engineer, but thank God I built a house, I said that didn't make sense, understanding that hazard management made it quite clear that we were low on shelter space, we are living in a hurricane belt, and even some of the other cutbacks with the pitching of the roof, the height, and even MEP were actually stripped out or actually lessened that made the efficiency of even operating the building questionable. How dare I question that? It was only after we had recaucused that was made clear, that it was silent from the paper that we were given to review, and in the actual document, it clearly stated not value for money based on the cost per pupil, that we saw a different storm came down on us who were asking the right questions.
And meanwhile, you have at least one, maybe even two, that support the paper because it's brought by the premier. So I don't really actually need to read the papers.
Someone actually said that.
That is
Yes.
actually said. So this is the majority that you're up against, in case people are wondering, well, why can't you stay and fight? If you're debating against people who haven't actually read the materials,
Yes,
then this is a farce.
yes. Which,
And-
which goes straight into the conduct in caucus that we were, that has been expressed. I don't want anyone to feel that the four of us actually exited or tendered a resignation, and I'm quite sure with the topics that have been expressed here tonight that you can see there's mounting reasons that led to this resignation. The caucus atmosphere is one where I can only refer to as being toxic at times, actually combative. Yes, and when you look at some ministers actually do their work. We actually read papers before we go to caucus. And everyone who knows my previous role as an immigration consultant, I was always the punching bag in there when it came to standing up for the Caymanian people, when it came to immigration reform, immigration laws, and certain things that just came across the table. The behavior towards those who just honestly wanted to contribute to paper, give your views, bring your expertise to the table without overstepping that responsible minister was always, you were always attacked. You were literally verbally attacked. What motivated us many a days in going to caucus, which there was no respect for timing. We would have persons coming in, making presentations, pretty much waiting for just a quorum, sometimes up to 3 hours. And I know that there are civil servants who are tuned in tonight, who feel that their voice have been smothered, but I am telling you one thing for sure. I was always an open door like my other 3 colleagues, and you no longer have to be scared. There is a box in the back that you can put your suggestions in if you want to be anonymous, but it is disrespectful when you're in a statesman and stateswoman role to have persons coming in to meet your government, and because it's not necessarily your subject matter, you mosey on in when you want to, or just come late for no excuse. That's not how you run a country. And then you get questioned when you actually ask the right questions because you've taken the time to actually research, read, and digest your papers. Now, we're not going to talk about the outburst or sometimes the fumes of alcoholic beverage that is pretty much smothering you sometimes. We're not going to go there. But that is what we were subjected to. And what is even more disheartening is that we were crying out loud for some accountability, for some reprimanding to be done, and nothing was done. So when you look at this constant, why did we leave and fight? Let me tell you something. We are fighting better, not bounded by shackles and chained by collective responsibility. And I am proud that I now am using my voice and people will see exactly what remains. And I am proud to be here tonight with my other 3 colleagues, because if you think the fight is not real, we're holding them accountable.
Yes, we'll dive right into the next agenda item, the anti-sexual harassment bill. So, right smack out of the door of being a new minister, the headline goes, new minister, female at that, lacks the political will to bring this legislation to Parliament. Quite the opposite. The former minister, Mr. Panton, can tell anybody in this room or just listening on these wavelengths that as at the time parliamentary secretary and as the chair of the youth parliament, I felt that this was a perfect opportunity to let our young youth parliamentarians feel that they were being listened to, that the government was empowering them. And I started to ask questions about how can you bring this bill forward knowing that the youth parliamentarians had worked so hard and extensively they were the first to debate this in our parliament. And, thankfully, the former minister got his team together, prepared it, and then it had gone out for public consultation. As I mentioned in Parliament, I took it to caucus, and of course, there were some concerns, some to do with the way that the investigations were being conducted in terms of what agency was going to do the investigation. And the ministry staff took it back, went to the courts to find out, should this be something that should go through the courts? Should there be an additional tribunal? The long and short is we found a balance where we then changed the legislation, the draft bill, to reflect that the Department of Gender Affairs would be the investigating body of any complaints that came in relation to these matters. And then the establishment of a anti-sexual harassment tribunal would have been established by way of the bill. And what is most disappointing is that after having some heart-to-heart conversations with the men that sit around the table, we got to a place where the men were supportive of the draft bill. And we're now on crunch time because we're going to be having Parliament sitting in December. I'm the female minister that wants to champion this to the finish line for not just the women, but for the youth parliamentarians, because it sends a message. You start having conversations in workplaces. Yes, it means we change behaviors, because now we're looking at, okay, well, is this appropriate? Should I be making these jokes to my female friends? And I'm referring to myself, because sometimes I make jokes that probably aren't appropriate either. But we have to start somewhere at home. And what was most disappointing for me was to have gotten this on the agenda, this last sitting of caucus, which would have meant that if it would have gone through to cabinet, it would have been deliberated on in the next December sitting of Parliament. And again, yes, I would have been seen as champion getting this to the finish line. What I was told by our female leader is that it had to be deferred because she hadn't read it. And it's quite disappointing for me, and I'm saying it publicly because we need to do more as females when we're in these positions of high office. And to say that you didn't read it when it's quite contradictory. Here you're bringing your business case, which me, I'm the person that's coming from being speaker, thinking that, you know what, the country doesn't deserve at this stage an early election. I didn't join up to the government because I felt, woohoo, this is the team to go to. I came because our country did not need an early election at that time. And it still doesn't. We need to have stability in our country, right? However, you bring a business case that I haven't had a chance to look at because I've never seen it before. And because we are asking questions on the matters that have popped up with one of the largest projects that fell in my lap, of course, it's contradictory to then turn around and say, okay, well, it's been on the agenda, but I haven't read it. So again, it just leaves me with a taste in my mouth where it's unfortunate that you're sitting here in the caucus that has the most females ever in the history of this country. And something of this importance, couldn't be prioritized. Instead, we're focusing on amending the legislation that protects our most valuable asset, our environment. That is more important than sending a message that we have to have appropriate behavior, because at the end of the day, we're supposed to be world class and pursuing excellence. So I just feel that to be bound by collective responsibility and taking hits for a government in terms of decisions that you may not necessarily have felt aligned with who you are, things like this are a must. It has to happen. There has to be a balance.
Now, for this last agenda item of the key resignation issues, I'm going to ask those in attendance in person and those online to bear with former Minister Kathy while she outlines the last key resignation issue. I'll ask her to take your time because this is the straw that broke the camel's back. Proceed, former minister.
Before I proceed, I want to say that what I found most disappointing and also surprising is that for those of you who listened to the radio when the Honorable Premier was on recounting our last caucus, she went through detail by detail the exchange between the members in terms of the outburst. She went through in detail the conversations about the National Conservation Amendment discussions and the whole free conscience vote. But ironically, nothing was discussed about the most critical issue that caused each one of us to leave there saying, after all that we've shared with you tonight, after the picture that we have painted that we've been dealing with, and now to have this rest on our shoulders, nothing has been said. And perhaps that was what she was referring to when she spoke to each one of us about putting Cayman first. Well, that's why we're here. So as as MP Andre mentioned, this is quite technical. And I am proud to say this was baptism by fire for me to take on this regen project. And I was really upset that I ended up having this land in my lap. It wasn't something that I was passionate about. I didn't want the ministry that I received, but I took it because, like I said to the civil servants the day that we all were sworn in, civil servants are required to pivot every 4 years. And that is our role as elected officials. Some of us I started off as a parliamentary secretary. You pivot where you're needed, you serve. And so I landed in the Ministry of Sustainability.
And just for clarity, for folks who may not know the term what regen means, we're talking about the dump deal. Okay?
I was just going to say that I was landed in the ministry with the garbage, no pun intended. But as many of you might recall, when we went down to Parliament earlier this year, I announced that the government had taken the decision to exit the project agreement. And when I refer to the project agreement, that was the dump deal or the waste to energy facility. It certainly wasn't an easy cabinet paper to be championing. Very similar to the National Conservation Amendment Bill. Every time I took the paper, members raised valid questions, whether it was about the technical components, whether it was about the financial components, the risk, the value for money, you name it, the project team was on standby and ensured that the information was readily available to the members to make an informed decision. And so we announced that the government had agreed to terminate the project agreement and conversations had begun with the DART organization to exit this project.
So what date, what time frame is that?
That was around May that I went down to Parliament
Of
and
this year?
announced of this year. Yes. Because remember, it took us quite some time. I started the ministry, I call it December, because we got an end of November. And the real work started with Regen in January. And so it was back and forth. We had discovered, well, I won't even go to the part about the termination because that's irrelevant. So After we announced the termination, October of this year, I took a paper to cabinet, which basically set out, okay, folks, the project team has been communicating with the DART organization. They are now ready to issue the termination notice. Termination notice in the cabinet paper set out termination for the 31st of October. Now, one of the things that was always set out is that if this project was exited, DART had done works at the dump that we were going to have to pay them for, whether we stayed or whether we left. And the paper set out that the termination proposal is the 31st of October. If we terminate, this is what the government needs to pay out. Members voted on it. We agreed unanimously. The termination date was set for the 31st of October. Fast forward, I think it was just a couple days later, we had Finance Committee, again in October. In October, there was a line item for the Regen project, and it was for the fees for 2024 for the exiting in terms of works that were conducted. So of course now, the project team, they operate and function based on cabinet mandates. So the cabinet mandate to them is, we're continuing to exit 31st of October, here we go. So they communicate to the organization that here is your termination notice, which will be effective the 31st of October. That was sent to them, and again, I made notes because it's quite technical, on the 23rd of October. By the 25th of October, I was sitting in a meeting that had been called urgently by the DART organization. And in that meeting was my acting chief officer, myself, the deputy governor, and because the premier was in Samoa, the acting premier at the time, Minister Seymour, attended in his capacity as acting premier. So I'm waiting to find out what's the urgency of this meeting, and the representatives from DART start out very calm. You can tell that they're here because they are trying to make sure that they're working with government in an amenable fashion. And they set out, well, we're here because we are confused. Okay. We received the issue of the termination notice effective the 31st of October. But on the other hand, we've been in discussions with the Premier and Minister Seymour in relation to wrapping up a further arrangement. Now, hold on a minute. Let me just paint it a little bit better so that it's no misunderstandings here. They also set out that what was expressed when they were communicating with the project team was that they were unhappy with the way in which the discussions were going with the project team. And I knew about their concerns with not having a member that would be seen with authority sitting at the table. So the meeting that had taken place was to remedy their concerns of having persons of decision-making capacity at the table. So imagine me, minister responsible for this subject matter, hearing that you're confused because on one hand, we're being told to terminate, and on the other hand, we're being told we really want to work with you because we don't want things to, get out of control, and we want to make sure that we end this thing amicably. Okay, the meeting ended by a quick determination that there was a miscommunication, is what the Minister Seymour referred to it as. This is an easy fix, it's a miscommunication within the government. We will resolve this matter expeditiously. Well, I sat there thinking, yeah, there's been a big miscommunication, more like lack of communication. And I did feel in that particular moment very, very embarrassed as a minister, but also as a member representing you, the people of this country, our government. Granted, it was a closed door meeting, but it was still embarrassing because here you have members of the same government sending different messages.
Yes.
So we walk
Unknown.
away from that. And the remedy for the situation was that the minister or the acting premier at the time instructed communications to go forward to the organization through the chief officer, the acting chief officer, from my ministry. Thank you for clarifying, making sure I clarify. Let me repeat that. I want to make sure everything is clear. The acting premier at the time, Minister Seymour, circulated instructions for me to advise my chief officer to communicate to the organization that the government is amenable to extending the termination agreement. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a blind man could see that that was necessary because we now have the largest financial investor in our country sitting at a table hearing two different, we need to find some way to find common ground here. So that was circulated. That was on the Monday. Between the 28th and the 29th of October, then my chief officer started to reach out to me to express, Minister, I'm receiving pressure to prepare a cabinet paper to draft and approve the extension of this termination. Now, again, we all know that this was something that would be inevitable. But number one, talking about the process again, if you remember our conversation about the National Conservation Amendment, here again, I am receiving word from my chief officer that I'm the minister that's supposed to be saying, we need to bring this paper. In turn, he's saying, Minister, you need to prepare this paper and take it to cabinet. Of course, that's not the way that things are supposed to process. So I said, hey, listen, this matter needs to be discussed in caucus. And subsequent to that meeting, a paper will be drafted if required. Sorry? The pressure, again, for clarity, the chief officer set out that the pressure was coming from the governor down. So it was on the civil service arm that this pressure was coming to the chief officer. For me, that's when I started to figure out we have a problem. Because now I have a paper that's being required, and there's no conversation between me and any of the elected arm. So is it that I'm the only one in the dark, or is this because this is something that other members are not aware of either? So I take the matter to caucus. So this matter comes up now after all of the stuff about the National Conservation Amendment Act, after being told that the anti-sexual harassment bill was not going to be prioritized. Now I'm saying, okay, guys, I don't see anything on the agenda here about this termination extension, but I'm receiving instructions from my chief officer that there's an urgent paper that's required. So we need to figure out how we deal with this situation. And of course, members in the caucus are like, oh, what are you talking about? So there's a joke about the who moment because they start to sound like owls. Who did that? Who? But the question started to come, well, what are you referring to? So I had to take everybody through the meeting that was held with the DART organization, the fact that the DART reps are saying, hey, listen, we're confused, like you guys are giving us mixed signals here. And now I need to bring up cabinet paper in accordance to the instructions that are coming from up, down, that this paper needs to be done to clearly ratify a decision that needs to be made. And that's where then the questions started to flow from the other members in caucus. Well, who was at this meeting with the DART organization when it was referred to at the private, well, no, at the meeting that was held in caucus, at the meeting that was held in the cabinet room with the deputy governor. Like I said, it's quite technical, so you gotta take a minute to just breathe it in. And it was at that time that I decided to allow the members to ask who, because I wanted to be diplomatic. I wanted to be respectful to the members that, for whatever reason, they decided that they didn't want to share it with the other members in the room, and see if they would have been forthcoming with their reason on why they'd had these discussions. It hadn't been shared with not just me, the minister, but the other members. And what was most disappointing is that it was a blatant aversion from, accepting that there was this meeting. What was said by the premier was that the only meeting that ever happened with the DART reps was the meeting when we had met with caucus. Well, that didn't line up with what the DART reps said, because they simply set out that it was, and they listed the individuals, they set out that it was the premier, the minister for, help me, labor and border control, chief officer for planning, and they listed out that there were other government representatives there to address concerns relating to lands and finance, in particular, the financial secretary. So I knew right away that there was two different meetings, and I was hoping that on this occasion, where we're having an open, frank discussion amongst members, the premier has every right to have whatever meeting she wants to have with whoever. She's the premier. And all that would need to happen is you come forward and say, listen, this is the decision that's been made. This is how it's going to benefit the people of this country. This is how we are going to eliminate any future litigation. And the story would probably just have laid there. But because of the way in which the functions and the process of cabinet and caucus had been taking place, I am looking at it now saying, okay, so I come out, leave this speaker position that I felt I was doing a great job exploring Parliament and making everybody see what Parliament was doing and whatever. I come in, the first thing, slap in the face with all this stuff about the National Conservation Amendment Bill. Now here we are again, and I saw it as decisions being made, and then coming to me as a minister and saying, Minister, this is what we decided. Now you got to bring it and put it on your paper, and it looks like a decision that you made. That wasn't good enough for me. That's not good enough for this country. We deserve what I said in Parliament, and many of you might remember when I stepped off of that dais and didn't know if I was going to resign or not. Some people felt like it was my resignation speech. It really wasn't. It was a call to the members that were sitting in their chairs and also to the listening public that our country deserves leaders that are not going to make decisions based on what's going to get them elected, based on what's going to benefit them. Our country deserves leaders that are going to make the tough, hard decisions. You think it's easy doing what we're doing? This certainly isn't easy. And as they say, sometimes you have to stand alone. Well, in this instance, we're all aligned in what we feel and have done. But I certainly will sit here tonight and say to all of you that are listening and that are in person here, that I make no regrets. Some people are saying we should have come to the public and we should have asked you, do you think we should resign? Well, in order for us to share all of this information with you, after telling you something like this, if you even said to us, I'm gonna go back and fight, well, number one, we can't, because now we have come out of an area of collective responsibility. We're able to now prevent the government from bringing contentious legislation. So we're actually having more power than people think we have. If the National Conservation Amendment Bill is so good for Cayman, how come it hasn't been published in the Gazette for the next sitting of Parliament? So we are here, even though we are not in our ministerial roles, we still have work to be done. And I call on all of you who are here tonight and just ask each of you to dig deep within your own hearts and find a way It's so easy to criticize every elected official, and even though we are not aligned in these positions, every person that puts themselves forward to serve in this high office makes a huge sacrifice. I think I'll stop there because I'm starting to get passionate now. But at the end of the day, I am really pleased and happy to have been able to serve as the Minister of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency. Make no mistake, even though it was a small ministry, it is a small ministry, they do a lot of work. And one day soon, the people of this country that sit around the table and make decisions, there's going to be a majority of members that appreciate the work they do. And it's not going to be a fight to get the work done, because we are going to have members elected that are here to protect the beloved Cayman Islands.
Well said, Kathy. And into the regen and that termination, it was clearly, as Kathy articulated, that there was another government in a government. And we cannot operate a government in a government. We have to be in one unison and one accord. That begs the question, then, where were we headed? And as Ms. Kathy alluded to, I personally gave 6 separate opportunities for the Premier to just say or identify oneself. She remained quiet, to the point where it got to outside discussions where previous conversations about saving Barkas and exchange of land, I was getting confused. What does that have to do with the termination of regen versus land swap? And it, to my surprise, the Premier, who had never had any discussions, was the one that says, no, those are 2 separate conversations. How would you know that if you weren't in discussions? So this is not about pointing fingers, ladies and gentlemen. This is when you see something that does not look right, does not smell right. You cannot remain where you have 3 cabinet ministers that would be constantly outnumbered to 5 remaining, which is why your 3 cabinet ministers and 1 parliament secretary is here, because we made the conscious decision that we were not going to fall for anything, but we were going to stand for something.
To offer and piggyback on what former Minister Turner is saying, I want to recap the importance of what former Minister Kathy has just laid out from the perspective of a member like me who is not in the trenches of this discussion. So paint a picture and listen to me now. We went to Parliament in the summer and told the country the dump deal was coming to an end. There is a cabinet decision that says it is ending on 31 of October. If the then responsible Minister for the Environment gets called to a meeting with the executives of the island's largest investor to say, we are confused. On the one hand, from your ministry, we are getting a termination notice for 31 October. On the other hand, we're having a meeting with a subset of the caucus to discuss extending beyond the 31st of October. The cure for that difference cannot be an email from any chief officer to the organization to say that there's a willingness to extend. The only body that could approve that is the cabinet. So it doesn't matter where the pressure is coming from, because chief officers can't put cabinet papers forward. Only the minister can. So no amount of instructions from the governor to the chief officer can cure that. The responsibility then is either the premier call the minister and say, we have a difficulty that I need your help to resolve, or the governor call the premier and say, we need something from your minister, but it can't be squeezed through the civil service. It doesn't work that way. So the reason, the reason for our surprise is then to get into a caucus meeting in any other business and to learn that there is a separate part of the government, unbeknownst to you, we're all collectively responsible, that is acting in a way that the cabinet decision doesn't say can be done. This is supposed to end on the 31st of October. So in a nutshell, what happened to them is realizing this can't be cured by the chief officer's email. We need to come back to the full cabinet and disclose to them what we have been doing. The liability for the country is, what if the rest of us say, no, we had a decision. We went to Parliament. We told the country is going to end. Why would you all go enter into settlement talks? Well, because we thought that there was litigation risk. Well, if you thought there was litigation risk before, there's for sure litigation risk now, because all DART is holding is a message from the government, a chief officer, saying it can be extended. There is a willingness to extend. So now if the rest of us say, no, we're not going for that, and that's the decision, now DART has a legitimate expectation to sue because they thought it wasn't going to end, or is a possibility it wouldn't end. That cannot stand. The proper order is for the rest of the government to say, hang on, I know some of you mentioned 6 months ago that maybe we should enter into settlement talks instead of paying them cash. We realize that you all are right. We need a decision from everybody to dispatch a working group to see if we can settle for them, not go off and do that behind our backs and have us then come back and ask to rubber stamp it. At that point, the executive is malfunctioning.
Understanding time?
So understanding the time, we will now open questions to those in attendance.
Let's see, my mic's on. I'm going to be moderating the Q&A. I'm going to ask you guys to make my job easy. We do have some people coming around the room with mics. You had your hand up first. So we're going to do this one at a time, orderly, and I may please try to get to your question as kind of quickly as possible so that everybody has time to get their questions out there and the MPs have time to answer them. Oh, right here. Go ahead.
Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
I just heard some stuff tonight that to say truly disappointed is an understatement. We elected leaders, and that's what you guys are.
Thank you.
But where my problem lies in this whole thing, and there is a problem, is that I hear operational issues as the reason for your key reasons for resignation. And folks, when you sit in the executive chair, this is par for the course. You may not agree all the time, but collectively, you got to deliver for us. And that is where I have the problem. You got 6 months, 7 months to an election. Wait it out. You waited 3 years. I'm hearing that this couldn't have just started yesterday. What I'm hearing here seems like this is deep-rooted and have been going on for a while. I may be wrong in that, but that's what I'm hearing. Now I speak for me, I'm not speaking for no one else. When I look at this whole thing, and it was acknowledged by the group that this mass resignation placed the country at risk, particularly in the financial sector. And yeah, I live here too, so I heard that echoed across the circles that I'm a part of. And if you only knew that, because you had to have known that, right? With 6 months to go before the election, why would you have done that? Why would you have done that? I understand the stand of principle, but you represent us. When people looking in from outside, foreigners, investors, they see a man and a wife fighting, that's what we're doing. There's no one right and wrong in that argument. They're seeing two people fighting. And folks, you hold the highest office in the land. The highest office in the land. I expect you to represent us there. Now, I hear what you're saying. You have more power now to affect change. But you put us at risk before you did that. And I don't know how much risk because, you know, this is all new and things are still going on, but certainly there's got to be a risk of confidence, right? There's a risk of confidence. Kathy, I hear you. I really hear you, and I felt you here tonight when you were talking. But to the other three, right, you didn't have that fight. And to resign on what you call principle, I can feel where she's coming from, but I don't feel you. I feel that you just jump on board. That's what I feel. So all I'm saying, I guess, going forward, lessons learned, right? You guys got talk because it appeared that you didn't talk. I don't understand how a government can run with 3 ministers not speaking to the premier on a constant basis. I would expect that all of you would be breaking bread and lunch together. That's not what happened. That's what you're telling us anyway.
We do. We do. But we do.
Well, if you did, this wouldn't happen.
Sir,
MP Ebanks, do you want to just address the financial services industry risk?
Yes, address the question, but I also want to make sure that there's time for other people to
Yeah,
ask questions.
I finish here now. So, folks, that's all I'm saying, right? You're going to be running for office in a couple of months again. You got to think about these things, and this is a lesson learned for all of us, right? But this was hard for me because I was shocked. I know the strength of the people that are sitting up there, and I didn't expect that from you guys, and that's why I'm disappointed. I didn't expect that at all.
For my part, speaking as the former Minister for Financial Services, the greater risk to the country isn't our resignation. The greater risk to the country is a malfunctioning executive.
yes. Yes.
And for everything that we just described, we were on a runaway train. And somebody had to pull the emergency brake.
Yes.
Next question.
We're going to try to get to as many people as possible.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As I listened, I heard about alcohol, politics, disrespect, policy. Sounds very chaotic. And it seems to me like a lot of material for Matt Brown, run down and give me a story. My question is, the governor is responsible for good governance. Have any of you individually or collectively wrote to the governor about your concern before resigning?
So good question. And to answer your question, it's a good question. And to answer your question, no. None of us, as far as I know, none of us did. As many of you might understand and appreciate, the governor doesn't get involved with the local politics. She leaves that for the premier to do. She leaves that for the premier to do. And I mean, I hear the questions about breaking bread and I think that MP Andre covered the fact that we saw it as more of a risk to continue in this fashion. And if we felt that the governor would, I mean, If that's the case, you have a minority government right now, right? So it just shows you that the governor is not going to get involved if she sees where the government is able to continue to function.
And more to the point, the governor isn't in a silo off by his or herself. The governor sits in cabinet and witnesses the behavior for herself.
Yes, yes.
Next question.
There's a question in the back. There's a question in the back.
There is a question in the back. Is the mic?
No, I didn't say.
What is the governor doing in these meetings?
The governor was,
didn't-
she didn't say that. The governor is
mic
not
is-
sitting in the meeting with
yeah.
her. That, she didn't,
No.
no, no.
Mr. Bush, I didn't say anything about the governor. I said that in the meeting, that the emergency meeting that was called, the deputy governor was in attendance. And that was because the email that was sent from the DART organization requested, and you can only appreciate it's because the deputy governor holds the responsibility, as you know, in accordance with Section 55 of the actions and functions of the civil servant. So perhaps they included the deputy governor because they weren't sure why the actions had been taken.
Okay, there's a lot of questions. Let's give the mic to Dr. Frank, and then we're going to move forward with the hands up, because I know a lot of you are trying to get to some questions here.
Good afternoon. I'm happy that I'm able to hear the real story, but I also know from backstage what goes on in those situations. I remember, Kathy, when I came to visit Miss Julie some time ago, that she said to me that she was tutoring you. And I'll never forget that. Now, I've known Miss Julie for a long time. I remember the first time seeing her in Bordentown at, listening to the Unity team. And I see everybody. I've been in politics, but I'm not really a politician. I'm a sociologist. And for a very long time, I have been trying to appeal to the Caymanian people to tell them that the system is weak. The system at the bottom is weak. We can't blame the ministers. We can't blame the representatives, because what we give them is a political system that is not workable. In no country in the world can you approach making collective decisions as purely individuals. It's madness. So it has come to the point now where this entire idea of independence, that I know one man spent $1 million to promote in one election. It does not work. Because at the end of the day, politics is a collective endeavor. What you have testified to here tonight is that it wasn't working collectively,
That's true.
and therefore it failed.
Yes.
And so I'm happy that you made the decision you made. But that if we do not make some sense and some use of this situation, it will even get worse.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. We've got a question right here.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Ali Banks. I'm a representative from Sustainable Cayman. I would like to say on behalf of young people, you guys sitting on this podium right now is an inspiration, is showing you guys a stand up principle and integrity. Thank you. Just so for the sake of time, I'm gonna get straight to my question. So this is a question on behalf of all the ambassadors. Do you have or had any concerns about the chosen Route 3 for the East-West Ontario?
I was just leaning into my colleague because, again, some of these decisions have already gone through cabinet. What I will say, as the former minister, is that I took counsel from the department. But again, you go on collective responsibility. And so there are reasons why the route that was proposed has been decided upon by the government. My position as it relates to the environmental standpoint is I believe that there could have been a safer route that could have been utilized.
Thank you.
Sorry. Hi, good evening, everyone. I want to share a quote by Martin Luther King. He said, "We need leaders not in love with money, but in love with justice. Not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity." I am so proud of the three women that sit in front of me and the gentleman this evening. As a Cayman Bracker, Ms. Stevens, let me say to you that I'm a 38-year alumni from Cayman Brac High School, and yes, do we need upgrades to our school in Cayman Brac? Absolutely, because I've left it, I've seen it. It is still in the condition that I left there 38 years ago, but not at that price. And in truth, in fact, what we need here in Grand Cayman is a third high school because of the overpopulation of our three schools currently. I am asking for you guys to guide us and tell us, what do we need to do as citizens to bring this to a stop where this school do not move forward with? Thank you.
Continue to do exactly what we do. And right now, we are stronger together. You have a voice, you speak out, and we will continue to fight the fight for everyone. But you use your voice, you come out, you participate. Whenever there are any public consultation meetings, Caymanians, use your voice. Hold your representatives accountable. And if there is more dialogue, more information that you need, go to your representatives, request a meeting. It doesn't matter whether or not they have a constituency office. We know how that goes. But if they are a minister, the government administration building is your building. They have to make time for you.
Okay, folks, we've got a lot of questions. We're gonna keep moving through the room. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I'm not the greatest on the mic. I respect he's not. I'm glad that I got here so I could really get to hear what the story was. You know, on the road there's 15 different arguments, you know, about this, that, next thing. You know what I'm saying. But anyway, I'm glad to understand this. But I just want to ask one question. Can anybody tell me what they finalized or what they thought about doing for the beach, the erosion? Anything on that? I have a suggestion that I want to. Is it okay now? Okay, like that? All right, I want to say this. I'm a Caymanian. I'm 82 years old. I walk the beach from the time I was 5 years old, up and down there. And I see how the tides go this way, go that way, and take the sand away, this and that. What I'm trying to say is if you go down there now by the Royal Palms, between the Royal Palms and the Seagull Apartments right now, I guess people have been there looking at it, I would say 60 feet to 100 feet. You got white sand all the way up to where you got to stop your car to get out. You know why that? Because when the sea come in there, the sea run all the way up and settle in and leave the sand. But they got these buildings down by the water. When the sea hit them, it splash and take all the sand away. Now, I don't know how you're going to go about it. But I guess they had to get approval from government. Not you, not this government. Probably a long time ago. But they had to get approval to put these things on the beach, I'm sure. But what government now need to do now, the government now need to do is to make them, not beg them or tell them, make them. Take all of that cement off the beach. Take it off the beach. And I guarantee you, I guarantee you 6 to 9 months, you'll see your beach coming back.
Sir, what is your question, what they see is next for the beach erosion, or what, sorry, what's your question?
Yes. I can chime in.
I asked the question, what was being done about it, or is
What's
anything
being
being
done
done
about
about it? But that's my suggestion to it.
I can chime in here and just say, in my personal opinion, based on the feedback that has been received from the technical team, that there's the issue with the beach is not going to be resolved quickly. We missed that boat. And what I said earlier about the day when you have enough members sitting around the table that have the political will to make decisions that are going to benefit our natural resources and not worry about who they're going to upset and how it's going to impact moving forward, we won't be able to address things like the beach. But Mr. Hurlston, you're absolutely correct. The only way to address it is to take that approach.
Okay, we've got a question at the front. Mr. Billy, we'll go to you. You go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. Good evening, everybody. I am a business owner. Sabrina, you were a previous business owner. And one of the things that we both know, and Mr. Frank touched on it, is systems make things work. This system is obviously broken. And my question is, when is the last time the government has cleaned house on their system? Or is it being built as you go? Because if the system, like Mr. Frank said, is broken, this can always fail every single 4 years. This show that's going on can happen every single 4 years. So my question is, how do we clean house of this system, and who's going to control that?
Thank you for your question. It's a combination of things. People need to understand the power of their vote first and foremost. Hold on. You asked how we're going to, the system that we are elected in requires constitutional amendments. And that takes the political will of exactly some of the people that you see here. But as Kathy alluded to, there are some very difficult conversations that needs to be had. The political will to change, let's say, constitution, to give even your elected MPs a little bit more flexibility so that the machinery that we are elected to work with is balanced. That takes courage and political will with your elected officials to bring that mandate forward for the civil servants to enact that change.
I'd like to chime in here as well, because one of the things that I've had the benefit of, I guess, enjoying, because it has been indeed a privilege to travel for the Parliament and be able to listen to other Caribbean jurisdictions brag about how organized and mature their political systems are, makes me realize that we have a lot of work to do. To answer your question, the independent thing, I can say it right here. I ran as an independent because I wanted to break status quo. And at the time, there was one organized party. I didn't feel that what the country needed at that time aligned with why I was putting myself forward. What we need is we need more organization, and we need to future-proof the country by putting procedures in place. How do you nominate members to run? How do you have this? So, well, the truth is, you don't have to be a politician and put yourself forward to run for public office to start these movements, right? All it takes is members within the community getting to the position of saying, we need to organize a party system. This is how you're gonna decide on candidates that are running. This is how you're going to, I know Minister Andre, I keep calling him minister, and gotta get used to MP. But in my discussions with persons over, especially in the Caribbean region, looking at the fact that Cayman is seen as leading the Caribbean in terms of infrastructure and all the things that we have afforded to us, we are way behind with our politics. Well, I think, yeah, but it's because we haven't had an engaged community. I've said it before and I will say it again. Members of Parliament today and previously don't take the time to educate the people on how things function. Get your mic so that the public can hear.
The systems that I'm talking about isn't necessarily known to the general public. And this is a very detailed thing. So when you're talking about the government of other countries and you're seeing their systems work, those are systems that you can copy and paste. And my question would be is why hasn't it been done? That's not our job. We elect officials to do so. It's very easy to copy and paste systems.
That's what I was alluding to, that it takes the political will of the elected officials to make that a priority for change by engaging in situations like this. But it looks as though we've been running a country that lacks a lot of national policies, and we are more reactive than proactive. This is the first set of elected officials, and based on what I have engaged with persons coming to the Prospect constituency, I have educated on the system more than actual problems on a constituency level. And it will floor you that people are oblivious of the separation of powers, how the Constitution works, and even our role. So I totally get you as being two entrepreneurs. When you look at that and how your country works, it's no different. But you can't just going as a lone independent and say, I had my political rally, this is what I want to do, bang. You get your elected officials, they're a bunch of independents, we gotta come together. How do you prioritize a priority list and make that number one? When you have people that are homeless, you have a hospital that needed help, you needed a police station in Kimmanbrack, you need a prison to make sure that our inmates are treated humanely. We have people that are overseas that are begging to come home. But that's what we're saying. You need the political will collectively to take that change, and the civil service arm bring the recommendation. We take it to the public and we get your support and we take it down and we make that change.
This is a start to that. Just start.
So just to do a time check, when do we lose online audience?
Yeah, it's 9:35.
How many minutes do we have left?
Mr. Billy's had his hands up from the start. Can we get the mic to Mr. Billy? Okay, Mr. Billy, go ahead.
Time. So just to confirm, how much, before Mr. Billy speaks, even let him know how much time that he has. All right, so we got about 15 minutes.
That's the wrong thing. The first thing I'd like to start with is imprisoning a lot of people in government for the continued violation National Archive and Public Records Law. The meetings of which you speak, Ms. Cathy, a while ago, that were held, for which there are no minutes, and that's how the DART organization works. They don't like minutes of meetings. Been involved. When there's no minutes of meetings, you've violated the National Archive and Public Records Law, Section 12, which requires the conduct of whenever government business is conducted to be recorded, be it on phone, be it by email, be it by meetings. I've been in meetings in which the legal department is represented, refuses to take minutes. I've discussed this with Mr. Andre before. And a lot of this concerns the theft of our right-of-ways to the beach by big developers blocking right-of-ways. So that's one way we need to start. Stop putting in print that we believe in rule of law. We are doing it in print, but in practice, we're rule of lawlessness. Now, you talk about planning, Mr. Turner. We had the 1975 draft development plan. If we had that, Cayman would be totally different. We had 1981 tourism management plan, 1992 tourism management plan, 1996.
Mr. Billy,
Then
I'm
yes,
sorry,
ma'am.
we've got a lot of questions to get
Yes,
to.
that's
Can
fine.
you get to your question?
The question is get to lawfulness in plans. We had Vision 2008, with which you had participation, thousands of people, but then government ignored it because of the corruption and not doing what certain people wanted, and the people pushed to one side. We have district councils, which would do. Not one of you have district councils officially formed. Go ahead and form it. You can. And you can do it now. And I will just close on this. Our beach problem is because of our sewage, lack of treatment of the sewage, including the one that is the Water Authority. It does not kill the pathogens that kill the coral. No coral, no beach, no tourism. It is very simple. They have known this to be the problem since the 1980s, and they have hidden it from the public. The beaches came to the buildings, and the buildings had to be protected by seawalls. Carl Caymanian Hotel, in front of that seawall, when I was a kid, was 150 feet plus out to sea.
Mr. Billy, we've got to keep moving on.
You can move on, darling, but I'll tell you what is happening in this country, right? Where we're messing ourselves up. We have the public finance and management law. Why we had that? Because we then had to have the framework for fiscal responsibility. And now the Premier wants to go and do away with that, to put ourselves in debt. So we'll be like the US or the UK themselves, which are in debt. And then you ruin the country. Jamaica with the problems. And then we don't need that. Live within your means. You see all these sail ships? Cut your sail according to your cloth. Have a little bit of the marine heritage still. Yes,
you,
ma'am,
sir.
you
All
can
right.
have it back.
Thank you.
Check 1, 2. Yes, good evening, everybody. I am very proud to be here, and I'm very proud of these 4 individuals that represent us. My one question is, why, when you saw it happening, why didn't you do it sooner?
Can I answer really quickly? As you just heard Mr. Tatum raise his concerns about even after what we laid out, it's still the view by many people that we should have continued to try to hold it down, to take it through until the election. But where we pulled the plug was where it got to the place where it just couldn't function anymore. As Andre said, you now have a loose train. But we didn't just walk away on the first instance when things didn't go the way that we.
Why not? Why didn't you do that?
Because that's not the way that a government works. And if
That's
you
the way
have
it
an
should work. That's the way it should work.
Take a next question.
When you see it, you call it.
Next question,
Yeah,
Tommy. and
all
then
that preference stuff,
this-
we don't
I-
need that.
Yes,
We love you.
Tommy.
Good afternoon. I'm wondering, after hearing all of this and all that's broken, how do we actually go about enacting the part of the Constitution that makes district council mandatory? Because every single member that's elected, when I went back and looked at your Constitution, whatever it was you put out 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, you all advocated for district
Right.
councils, and nobody has done anything
I-
to enact that section of the law to ensure that district councils are mandatory.
Right.
And it's not you guys to call a meeting to form a district council. When I read the Constitution, it tells me it's our
Right.
responsibility, the voters, to call that meeting and do it, but you have to do it by law and make it mandatory. That part of the Constitution is still silent, I think.
I'd like to answer your
So-
question.
I know you only have 6 months left, and basically that don't give a lot of time for it to be done. But I would like an undertaking tonight to ensure that each one of you would bring a motion, because it only need to be supported by one person for that to be done.
What I would like to answer Mr. Ebanks with his question is I'd like to say that I can proudly sit here tonight and say I had capacity before becoming a minister to do the work to put together a district council. And it was done in a way where it was not a political appointment. We went through a process where persons were nominated throughout the community. We had an election or selection at a church hall. It was public. Anybody could show up. The council was established. So from my standpoint, I can say to my voters, oh, I checked the box and I established a district council. But what I would like to say to you is it goes back to the question that this young man up front asked. For me, I'm not now saying to this district council, hold your meetings. You guys need to come back and ask me or tell me what you want me to do. So what I will say to you is that we still don't have the appetite from the public to hold organized groupings together to hold the MPs accountable. And to me, it's a gift. If you have a district council, then you don't have to wonder, well, I wonder how my people feel about this, because it's a pick up the phone and drop a quick message. So I was really looking forward to having that engagement. And the truth is, the individuals that put themselves forward, they had every intention to serve, but life happens. And it should be a reminder that with any type of service comes sacrifice. It might mean missing a PTA meeting or miss cooking dinner with your kids or whatever the case. And I don't think our people are there yet. And that's what we need. We need people hungry enough to hold our people. Now, I see you shaking your hand because this young man in the front made a valid point. It would be remiss of us after experiencing what we've experienced, after saying that the function lacked organization, to just sit here and say, do nothing. So I say the monkey is on my back.
Okay. Please, yes.
Good evening. Everybody can hear me? You can hear me? Yeah. Okay, good evening. To all of you great leaders, I thank you for having principle, integrity, and for making a stand for doing what is right and not forgetting that we, the people, are the ones who elected you. And I'm proud that you made the stand that you did. My question is, with everything such as, the contract that we had with DART, being finished on October 31st, I think that's what you said, right, Kathy? Yeah. And then there was another meeting, with John Seymour saying, actually keeping it open or extended. With that and the proposed amendments to the NCA, would you see that before election, would you have some, as in maybe that law passed where you would have the NCA amendment completed as in the bill passed and the, with the dump and all of that? If that is not done, but prior to election, is it any way possible we could add it to the referendum to get the people's decision and saying, well, okay, we want this to end with DOT, we want this contract to be finished. We want the NCA amendment bill, passed. Is there any hope on the horizon for that? That was my question.
What I had mentioned earlier, you might not have heard, but I'd said that it has already been announced that no contentious legislation would be brought because we now have a minority government. And so I don't see the National Conservation Act having been gazetted as yet, and we are getting close to the time for Parliament to meet. So I can't fully answer your question, but I am assuming that it hasn't been published because it might be deemed to be contentious or controversial.
Okay. We have one more question, and then we're going to go to closing remarks. I know, I'm so sorry, we just cannot get to all of the questions this evening.
Just really quickly in 2 points. When you talked about collective responsibility, and Andre, perhaps this is specific to you about the fiscal position of this country. It seems that we're in really, really dire straits financially. What are your concerns with not just the BRAC school, but the hemorrhaging of money with so many other things? It was so interesting that all of you tried to hold on for as long as you did with collective responsibility, not speaking out about the government. But when you were looking at putting forward some ideas of how we can generate revenue, speaking specifically now to the situation with the credit union, right? The premier got on national radio and threw you under the bus. There was no collective responsibility from her perspective. She said she didn't support it. So I do kind of wonder why you guys were holding on so dearly to this concept of collective responsibility when your leader, by example, wasn't doing so. That's my first question. The second one, just really quickly in relation to the Regen project. Kathy, if you can answer the question about how is it that we came to the point as soon as you took over as minister, actually canceling this contract. And there was a lot of talk on the Mall Road that the same John, who then went behind your back to try to patch things up with the DART organization, was the one who's pushing to have it canceled to begin with. And that's why certain civil servants, such as Miss, what's her name again? What's the name? Ahern, sorry. Why she was even moved to your ministry. And I mean, I guess to some extent, you sat there and allowed that to happen, knowing what was coming down the pipeline. Why else would she be moved?
So just before, I just want to make sure. So your question was why sit and allow the chief officer at the time to be moved? And what was the other question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying that the question really is, John seems to be playing a role of double agent.
So I can say that the decision that was made to exit the project came about because coincidentally, when I took ministerial position, I think it was the 30th of November was when the contract was supposed to be signed off on. And there were 3 condition precedents that had not been met. So we were going to have to extend it anyway. I took the position that before signing it and extending it, let's have a look. What are the legal implications? What happens if we don't sign this? Let's look and find out more about it. In relation to the individual that you mentioned, that had to do with a conflict of interest, which you touched on your show. But I will say that the position that you took wasn't the reason why I made the decision to move her. Or now, I didn't move her. I specifically said, I didn't see this as an issue that I could assign myself to because the Chinese wall was a barbed wire fence where you could climb over and see what's happening on one side and come back over and pretend you didn't go. That was the issue that I had. But again, because you're looking in the pursuit of excellence and not wanting to put yourself in a position where you're beating your chest, this is why I did it. I remained quiet on it because we were able to function and move forward. And these are still our people. So the position was made basically on those bases.
Okay, MP Ebanks, you wanted to say some closing remarks?
Yes, and Sandra's question segues into part of what I wanted to close on. First of all, thank all of you who came in person, and thank all of you who tuned in online for allowing us to have this opportunity. Thank you. Number two, there will be additional time for questions because this won't be our only meeting. And we do not want to lose the listening public at home. There'll be time for questions. So we are not going anywhere. So thank you, ma'am. In closing, since Sandra posed a direct question to me, I want to just remind the listening public of something a cousin of mine reminded me of today. He reminded me that, and I referred to a Cayman News Service article dated 15th November 2023, entitled, "Andre Lays Out Packed Doubts, Warns of Resignation." If you remember during the vote of no confidence proceedings last year, I already gave notice of resignation if there was any further scandal. So there shouldn't be any doubt as to why all of a sudden he is now leaving. I already gave my notice. And those who are on the stage with me also took those words to heart. The answer to Sandra's question ties back to the first questionnaires question. The reason that you hang in there so long is the weight of the decision means that you're putting potentially the country's reputation at risk. You're having to deal with projects that mean stuff to people, not just in your constituency, because you're holding national power. You have to now decide whether or not you are going to relinquish that of all the people you are going to help. Think of the mental toil of this decision versus whether or not there's an outburst that is not something I would have done on a radio show to another minister. You've got to pass that aside and be the bigger person for the people of the country. But when you add the entire set of events to a state that on top of everything that's on the agenda tonight, you come to discover that there is side dealings outside of an existing cabinet mandate that includes chief officers that should have no place in those meetings because it's not their subject area. At that point, cabinet/caucus is run amok. And someone has to pull the emergency brake. Now, I want to end with Kevon's question because I remember going to a small business expo and seeing you speak very eloquently of how much you have hustled to create your business. And I don't want to leave you with the impression that we haven't answered your question, because your question leads into where the country has to go to for transformative change. You are correct, sir. It's not on you. It's on us. It is on us to take a step back and decide for ourselves, is it time now, and I believe that's the case, for the country to mature into a more advanced politics of organized groups with people who set out a platform transparently, say who is going to doing what, who establishes district councils, and have you vote on that from an informed position. So if we're not going to resolve that here tonight, What we are here to do is to say what's there is not working, the brake had to be stopped for us to go and form that more perfect union. That's what's on us. So no, we do not have all the answers tonight because we didn't come away with some preconceived plan that was spun in the background by Wayne Panton and Dan Scott, as if we don't have our own minds and qualifications to spot nonsense. So yes, we are going to now talk with multi-generational Caymanians who either want to be in an electoral role, or Kevon, if you want to be in a civic role, to form an organization that can transform this country. This country is not beyond saving. In my travels, we're actually more advanced than others. But I use this quote in either parliament or at conferences. It's Abraham Lincoln, and I believe it applies to the Cayman Islands. If this country of ours destroys itself, it won't be from without, it'll be from within. My number is 925-8554. If you're interested in creating something that transforms this country to its true potential, where the success can be equally distributed to Caymanians, you call me and we will get started. God bless you all, and God bless the Cayman Islands. We are not done yet.
Refreshments are over here. We know that we want to thank you for coming, but we do have refreshments here in this room